many of you have used a router before? Okay, a couple of you, so that's good. All right. A few years ago, I did this sample of just a few things that the router is capable of doing. Okay. First thing you probably notice is router spelled out across the face of the board. All right. That's done with a bit called a Vayner bit. All right. A Vayner bit is just a router bit that has a point on it. Looks like a letter V. So if I hold it this way, so this will spin very quickly and turns the router basically into a giant pencil. You can engrave whatever you want into a board. So the lettering looks nice and straight. Those of you that have had Mr. Harpence for drafting probably know how to do the lettering like that. But if you don't, and you're interested in making something like a sign like this, I could show you how to do nice, neat lettering and how to follow those lines to make a pretty straight letter. Okay, so that's done with the Vayner bit. On the edge here, we have a 45-degree, what's called a chamfer. All right, that would be done with a chamfering bit. Okay, one like this goes right along the edge, cuts a chamfer. All right, over here we have a cove. All right, for a decorative edge. That's done with what looks like the opposite shape. Okay, that cove bit makes that shape there. We have what's one of the more popular ones, the Roman OG, okay, which goes along, makes that decorative edge here. Okay, so that's the Roman OG. Here we have a keyhole. So if you've ever seen, I'm sure you guys have seen this, either in wood or plastic parts that might hang on the wall, like a phone. You put a screw in the wall, and then you can drop it into that hole and drop it down, and you can hang stuff up. Okay. We have a dovetail on the end. Anybody know why we call that a dovetail?
It looks like a dove's tail.
Yes, it does look like a dove's tail. Really, you would never do what I just did here. This is just to show you the shape. In reality, a dovetail bit would be used with a special fixture on the router, and we can make this sort of woodworking joint, which maybe some of you have seen on drawers at home. Okay, very, very strong joint without glue, even though you would glue it, but without glue it's very strong. So this would be done on a router with a fixture that would hold this somewhat like this in a jig, and then with the router and that dovetail bit, it would do both pins and tails at the same time. All right, these are pins, these would be tails. Okay, and then we could fit those together, and they make our dovetail joint. All right, and they lock pretty much at a perfect 90-degree angle, which is kind of handy when you're making square drawers. Okay, so there's your dovetail joint. If we look at our project here, okay, the router is going to be used to make the base molding. Also, you guys saw the crown molding on some of the other boxes. That'll be all done with the router. Okay, but at this point, we need to make the rabbet for the back. Okay, so you guys are, like I said, you're at the point where you have a 1/2-inch thick board, maybe cut to the correct width. Your next step could be to cut into the final length of your top, your bottom, your sides. But before we do that, it would be much easier to route the rabbet across the entire length of your board and then cut them into different sections. So when you put it together, you have this little groove, this rabbet, to accept your back panel. Okay? Let's talk about the actual router itself. All right, we have two styles of router. This one is the more common one that we have now. I call these the dome top routers because the tops have like a dome shape to them. This is the more basic router. The other ones we will be switching over to in the next few years completely and phase these out. And you'll see why in a second. All right. Some of the parts of the router. You have two handles. All right. So do you think one hand or two hands should be used?
Two.
Definitely always two hands. All right. This flat part is called the base. This base provides a flat surface to support the router as we go around the outside edge of a board. Okay. If I loosen this adjustment right here, just like that, I can turn the motor and take the base off. Okay, completely. All right. So this is our motor. Now, something you guys should be aware of. The other machines spin at about 1,700 to 2,000 RPM, somewhere in there. All right, this motor spins at 22,000 RPMs. So this spins probably, 10 times or 20 times as fast as the other machine. So it's a very, very quick spinning motor. This part right here with the two hexagon shapes here is called the collet. The collet is what holds the router bit in place. All right. So if I were to install a router bit, let's see, I'm going to take our rabbiting bit. All right. By the way, on these bits, you guys see this little silver wheel? Okay, that's a bearing. Those bearings are on many of the router bits, and what their job is to ride along the outside edge of the board. All right, because if that bearing wasn't there, what do you think would happen? Yeah, it would just go everywhere. It would not make a nice straight rabbited edge or a nice straight decorative edge here. So those bearings are very important. All right, and that's what their purpose is. So if I want to install this bit, this collet is already loose. I'm going to slide this in, and I don't want to go all the way down, because if I go all the way down, the vibration could end up loosening up the collet. So if I feel it bottom out, I'm going to pull it back out a little bit, and then in the tool cabinet are red router wrenches. All right, red for R and router. Okay, so hopefully that helps you remember. They're hanging on a hook that's labeled router wrenches. All right, so the big wrench is going to go on the larger part of the collet. The little wrench goes on the smaller part of the collet. And you guys ever hear lefty loosey, righty tighty? Okay, that only works if you're looking at it this way. All right, so that might introduce some confusion. If that still confuses you, the top part of the collet goes clockwise to tighten, counterclockwise to loosen. All right, and that seems to be confusing every year for many of you. So anyway, I'm going to tighten this down. All right, do you think I need to put all my strength into tightening this?
Yes.
No. Okay, it just has to be snug down, tight, but don't like use all your muscles, all right, because you're going to regret it when you try to take the bit out. All right, so that's tight. I'm going to spin my base back on. And at this point, I want to cut a 1/4 inch deep into here. Does anyone know why I'm picking a 1/4 inch? Half of what? Half of the thickness of, not this board, but your pieces that you'll be using. And the back panel we're going to put in is a 1/4 inch thick. All right, so it's going to fit perfect. The way I do that is I'm going to get my ruler and measure from the base to the end of the cutter 1/4 inch. Now you guys notice I didn't worry about where I put the bit in the collet. In other words, I didn't leave the base on and try and move the bit and tighten it at a 1/4 inch. Doesn't matter, you just install it and then you can turn your base to whatever height you need. Okay, so that's perfectly set. Now the last 10 minutes I've been talking about you know, the base, the motor, the handles, the adjustments. I've been changing the bit, I've been touching the bit. What do you guys notice? It's not plugged in. That is one of the most important safety rules on a router that you could possibly know. All right, very, very important. Now you guys know me from my stories, right? There's a story about this situation. Okay, I mentioned my dad a lot. I realize that. Okay, but when he was in college, there was a graduate assistant. So a college kid who graduated in the program came back to teach a course in woodworking, like basic woodworking. And he was giving this lesson on the router. And he was doing the router bit change. He was showing everyone how to change the bit. And his problem was he left the router plugged in. Okay, and as he was adjusting the bit, okay, the motor rolled around and bumped the start switch on. Okay, and he ended up losing the tips of 2 fingers. Okay, can that be avoided? 100% you can avoid that, right? If you always make sure it's unplugged. In fact, the only time this should be plugged in is when you're actually routing the edge of a board. All right, when we turn it off, we want to unplug it as well. All right, so the other thing you guys will notice is this particular router has a switch guard. So I'm not saying that can't happen, but it's less likely that something will bump the switch on. Okay, but before I plug this in, what do you think I might want to check? Yeah, you don't know if somebody just like me was playing with the switch and left it on. So on top of this little guard for the switch, it says on and off. So I'm going to make sure it's on the off side. All right, and that'll be ready in a second so we can route this rabbit. Now, I'm going to be working on this piece of wood here. There's a couple ways you can do this. We could clamp it down to the bench using our bench dog system, which I'm going to show you, or we could use a carpet pad, which provides enough friction that it won't move around while you're routing. Okay, so I'm going to go with the first option for now, and we're going to grab one of these from the tool cabinet. These are called bench dogs. All right, they drop into the hole in the bench, which I'm sure many of you have wondered about. And using the vise, we can pull the vise back, lift this bench dog up, okay, and then we can tighten it up, and then that board will not move. Okay, that's our bench dog system. The problem with this system is, yes, I can do this. Could I run the router back this way? Yeah, what would happen? Yeah, it's going to hit the metal. It's going to destroy the router bit. So we don't want to route into the metal. Okay. So I'm going to show you the other option in a second. Now, I'm going to go across the grain first. All right. So let's pretend for some reason, you know, I want to go all the way around. I want that nice decorative edge or that rabbit all the way around. You guys are only going to be doing one side to start off with. But why would I go across the grain first? Does anyone know? Think back to the jointer lesson. Why do we never ever joint end grain? It'll split. Why? Because it goes across the grain, right? All right, remember we talked about those drinking straws that spread out across the tops of the straws. So a lot of times what will happen is when you route across the grain, when you get to the end, it chips out. All right, and that's fine if you didn't do this side, because now we can take the router and go along the length of the grain, along the edge of the board, and clean up that chip out. All right, if I had done this side first and then it chips out, you just ruined your nice edge. So that particular part's not really a safety issue, it's more just like skills. All right, so remember, you always want to route the end grain first. All right, if we're going all the way around the board, we want to go counterclockwise. Counterclockwise means you're going against the rotation. So if you guys think back to the spindle sander over on the bench there, if I went with the rotation, remember how it grabbed the piece of wood and started to move it? Well, kind of the same thing will happen with a router. You always want to go against the rotation, counterclockwise, so that you have as much control of that board as possible. All right? Okay. When we're routing, I personally like to sit so that I can look through the window here and see what's going on. If I stand, I really can't see what's happening. All right, the other thing you could do is kind of kneel down like this and keep your arms as far away from you as you can, and you can look through the window that way. All right. To start the router, what I'm going to do is keep it on its side. I'm going to hold it tight with one hand. I'm going to start it with the other hand, and then I'm going to grab the handle, lift it up, and I'm going to route the edge of the board. All right, we'll see. It may or may not chip out. So this is off. I'm going to plug it in. And here we go. I'm going to start it up on its side. Oh, and by the way, what do you think would be a problem with this cord?
Get in the way.
Could.
Yeah, make sure it doesn't get caught on the router bit. All right, that could be very bad. You'll see sparks flying and everything else. It's not fun. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll throw this behind my shoulder, so it kind of keeps it in the air, but it's whatever's more comfortable for you. Just make sure it's not going to get caught underneath of where the bit is, okay? All right, so here we go. I'm going to start it up. Oh, no power. That's a problem. Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's try this again. All right, here we go. All right, should I let go of this while it's still spinning? No, you always want to hold on to it until it stops completely. All right, and while I'm thinking of it, I'm going to unplug it. All right, the reason you hold on to that is, let's say you turn it off, you set it down, it's still spinning, somebody else needs a tool over here, they reach across, all right, they could get caught and cut by that router bit. So you always want to hold on to it. All right, so even with a brand new router bit, which that one is, you guys see how it chipped out on the end there? All right, not a big deal, because now what I'm going to do is route this direction using the carpet pad. And by the way, you could do this whole thing on the carpet pad. Just wanted to show you guys how that bench dog system works. All right, so we're going to route that, and we're going to clean that up. Okay, here we go. Okay. We'll wait till that stops completely. Alright guys, you see how that chip out's gone? You would never even know that that happened. Alright, so that's why I showed you that. Alright. Questions about the dome top router? Alright. Let's do a little bit with our D handle router. Alright. Or have you guys heard that before? D handle. What machine? Miter saw, yep. Alright, so basically a D handle router is the exact same motor. Alright, yes, they're different because this is about 30 years newer than the other one, but they do work the same, okay? The only difference with this motor is, look how short the cord is, okay? This is not meant to be used the other way, like the dome top is, alright? The advantage to a D handle router is the plug goes into the handle, alright? And we leave the motor on all the time. Okay, so the motor switch stays on, and then you guys see the trigger switch? Why is the trigger switch much safer than what that one has?
You can turn it off.
Because you can just let go of it and stop.
Well, yeah, you can let go of it, but do I have to take one of my hands off of the handles to start it? No, so both hands are in control and away from the router bit when I'm starting or turning off the router. All right. Yeah, so the other advantage to this is that it can't roll around, it can't possibly be left on. Like this one, we could leave the switch on and plug it in, right? This one can't possibly be left on because it's spring loaded, right? So, nice features. The only real difference to this, I'm going to take this base off. You don't have to do this, but I'm going to take it off so you guys can see what's going on. The collet is much larger, so there's different red router wrenches. These are the flat ones. Okay, they're hanging on the same exact hook in the back. So this time we're going to do our Romanoji bit. All right, we'll slide that guy in, and I'm going to use my 2 wrenches. Tighten it up. By the way, to loosen stuff, it might be easier sometimes if you work out the wrenches so you can use your 2 hands and squeeze them together. All right, but if you're trying and it will not budge, chances are you're tightening things. So try going the other way. Okay, so we're gonna make sure that's tight. Spin this on. This one I'm not really gonna measure because you can't measure it. Really, I can eyeball it and have an idea of what I'm cutting. My advice to you guys is either to have me check it or do a scrap piece, like do a test sample. Okay, so that's tightened up. I'm going to go across this part of the grain first. All right, that's good. All right, here we go. Get that out of the way. Sorry guys, I got you a little dusty there. Okay, so this is stopped. I'm going to unplug it. And you guys can see it made that nice decorative edge along the outside. You guys see these fuzzy things?
Yeah.
Little tiny bit of sandpaper, very lightly, and that goes away. All right, not a problem. You guys have a question? Okay. All right. Now, on the router, where's the guard? There is no guard. Very good. Okay, so this bit is completely and totally exposed. You have to be aware of that. Is it going to come out and bite you? No. But if your hand, for whatever reason, were to go under that base, you could have some problems, right? So be aware of that. There's no guard on the router. So as long as your hands are both on the handles, there's no way you're going to get hurt. Okay? Now I've kind of emphasized keeping the router unplugged. Okay? A couple years ago I had an incident where I didn't follow my own rule. And I'm not sure how I didn't get seriously injured, but what happened was, do you guys know what a router table is? Some of you maybe? Router tables are basically just a flat table where the router is mounted upside down, and there's usually a fence, so you would slide your board across the router bit in that case. Okay, so I was adjusting the router, and that particular router is different than these. Instead of having two parts of the collet with two wrenches, there's actually a lock that locks the motor in place, and then you use one wrench. So the motor lock was engaged and the start switch was on. But if the lock is on, the motor will not run. Does that make sense? Because it's like controlled that way. So if the lock is on, the switch will not work. But the motor was plugged in. Okay, so obviously that's the wrong thing, right? I should have had it unplugged. So I installed the bit, and it was tight, and now I needed to turn the bit a little bit to kind of line up and figure out the height that I wanted. So I go to turn the bit, and it's locked. It won't turn. So what do you think I did? I unlocked it. Well, what do you think happened? It turned on, because you take the lock off, the switch is on, it's plugged in, the motor's just going to do what it's supposed to do. So it turned on with my hand on the bit. Basically, I don't know if the stars were aligned right or somebody was looking down after me that day, but it basically pushed my finger away from the cutter head. Because remember, this is spinning at 22,000 RPMs. I don't care who you are, there's no way you have that reaction fast enough to move your hand away. Somehow I didn't get a scratch, I didn't even need a Band-Aid, but I really should have lost a finger in that instance, right? So, moral of the story, even I'm not perfect, right? Nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes. So let that hopefully be a lesson to all of us, to remind us to make sure the plug is always off and unplugged when you're changing bits and when you're not using the router. Okay? Very lucky. Okay. I wanted to show you guys this as well. This is just a small collection of router bits. All right, there are thousands of different router bits. In fact, I have more in the back that I've ordered for your jewelry boxes. So when you decide to do your crown molding this year, I have other options that we didn't have last year. So a lot of different decorative edges. The best thing to do is to either try it on a scrap piece of wood or to hold that bit up against the edge of a board so we can kind of figure out what the shape will look like. All right, so if you traced out with pencil or whatever, you could figure out what your bit's going to cut. All right. Let's go over our test real quick, make sure we've covered everything. All right. Do you guys remember what the part of the router that holds the bit is called? Begins with a C and it ends with collet. Collet. Very good. Okay, so the collet holds the router bit. What does the base do? What's the point of the base?
Keeps it on the wood. Okay,
it's a flat surface so that the router can ride around the outside of the board, 90 degrees to the board, everything like that, right? When we're changing router bits, what do you need to do? Make sure it's unplugged and off. Good. What do we always wear when we're routing?
Safety glasses.
Safety glasses. That's another quick story. I taught a couple years ago, I did a summer camp with 2nd grade through 5th grade kids, and we used the router to make little name tags for them. They got to engrave their name, and they had a blast, right? Of course, I taught them all the safety procedures and everything else, just like I'm teaching you guys. Somehow, this kid had his safety glasses on, but you could see dust goes everywhere. A little piece of sawdust got behind his glasses and into his eye. So they had to kind of wash his eye out, and he was fine. But you know, be aware that you definitely want your glasses on. Make sure they're on all the way, so that hopefully that doesn't happen to you guys. Okay. All right. When you're routing the outside edge of a board, what direction do we want to go? Clockwise or counterclockwise? Counterclockwise. Good. All right. When we turn off the router, what do you want to do? Hold it till it completely stops. Good. How many hands do you need to use? 2 on the handles? Yes, both hands. Okay. Yeah, 3 would be a problem. All right. After you're done using the router, what do you do? Unplug it. Very good. And what part of the board do we want to route first? The end grain. Yes, across the grain first. All right. And where is the large guard on the router? There is no guard. Very good. Okay. Questions? All right, guys. You put your glasses back, and we'll get your test out for you.